So, good evening to everybody. Capitalism on Edge. This is the straightforward title for the presentation of tonight that I'm very much looking forward to. And not only do we have a straightforward title, we have maybe an even more daring subtitle. It is a little program or like the title for a manifesto or something. I will read it out to you. How fighting precarity can achieve radical change. And not only that, we have a little addendum that is also very important, how fighting precarity can achieve radical change without crisis or utopia. It is a very bold and promising statement. I guess a lot to be discussed in the next roughly 1.5 hours with you. My name is Ludger Hagedorn. I am a permanent fellow at the Institute for Human Sciences, the IWM in Vienna. This is the series of our monthly lectures. And as long as the pandemic is the silent or not so silent ruler of this world, we do the monthly lecture online. And I'd like to welcome you all for that. We have two outstanding presenters of tonight. I'm very happy that they are with us. I will soon introduce quickly, both of them. Let me just mention on a practical note before that a text by Albena Azmanova was distributed. Whoever wanted to read it could read it beforehand. What we will do now is like having a presentation by Albena for some 20 to 25 minutes, followed by a comment by Wolfgang Merkel by about 5 to 10 minutes. And after that, you are invited to have your questions. Please post them to me through the chat function, and I will read them out to you. And I guess there will be many. I cannot promise that we will deal with all of them, but I'll do my very best and post them early on. So I think the chances are better the earlier you post them. A short introduction of the two speakers of tonight. Albena Azmanova, the presenter, is a professor in political and social thought at the University of Kent's Brussels School of International Studies, a long name for a university, I have to say. I will not repeat it. She has also held academic positions at the New School for Social Research in New York, at Sciences Po in Paris, at Harvard University, at the University of California, Berkeley. Albena Azmanova is well known as a scholar, author, political commentator who has written extensively on topics such as transformation of capitalism, social conflict, judgment and justice, rule of law, democratic transitions, etc. She is a visiting fellow to the IWM for the month of March and April. We are very happy, Albena, you're here. Let me just mention the most important reference for today. Your latest book, I have already mentioned, it has the same title as the title of your presentation of today, Capitalism on Edge. And it came out with Columbia University Press in 2020. It has a very nice illustration on the cover. It is entitled The New Sisyphus. It is actually a mural painting from Yekaterinburg in Russia, I found out. And it is portraying a new Sisyphus that is pushing uphill his load. And this load is not a simple stone as we know it, but it is a ball consisting of rubbish. So this is also, I already think, a very clear message from the beginning that you're not only speaking about social and political questions, but also about ecological issues in this book, and you do a lot. Let me also say that very recently, in fact, I think it's only like 3 days or 5 days ago, the German translation of your book came out. I have it here with me. Kapitalismus an der Kippe, radikaler Wandel ohne Krise. The subtitle in German is not as programmatic, but otherwise I think it would be far too long. It came out with the Viennese publisher Edition Konturen. I'm very happy to also announce that, and Mr. Georg Hauptfeld, who's in charge of Edition Konturen, has translated your book. We were cooperating with Edition Konturen in the past on 2 occasions, I guess, dedicated to Agnes Heller. Agnes Heller is published in Edition Konturen, and as it happens, I mean, you are also very inclined to Agnes Scheller. You were studying with her and still are influenced by her thoughts. So I think this is a good coincidence. Albena, thank you very much for accepting our invitation. And let me also say thanks for being with us at the IWM, for enriching IWM with your ideas and your liveliness in general. Wolfgang Merkel is a Professor Emeritus of Political Science at the Humboldt University of Berlin, a well-known and highly influential author and public intellectual whose analyses are widely discussed and held in high esteem by not only academia and media, but also by politicians, or at least by some of the politicians, I'd say. His maybe outstanding publications, I will only mention one. Recently, 2018, with Springer, he published a book entitled Democracy and Crisis, Challenges in Turbulent Times. And under the very same title, Democracy and Crisis, Challenges in Turbulent Times, he also published recently a podcast on our IWM website. This is a conversation with our IWM colleague, permanent fellow Ivan Vejvoda, in his series of the Vienna Coffee House Conversations. So this is a recommendation for all of you. Listen in, it's worth it. Wolfgang Merkel was a visiting fellow to IWM in 2020, just briefly or until very shortly before Christmas. Here we are back again very shortly before Easter. It's good to have you back at IWM, Wolfgang Merkel, at least virtually. And here we go. Albena, the virtual floor is yours. Capitalism on Edge.
Thank you, Ludger. I am so glad to be a fellow at the IWM. It's been my hope for quite a bit of time, and I'm thrilled to give this monthly lecture. It's a great honor. So let's see how it goes. Let me introduce the book from the point of view of where we currently stand. We are now living on the very tipping point of a radical policy shift. So far, 3 such great policy shifts have taken place over the past 100 years. The pure form of capitalism entered a crisis in the late 19th century and came out of it only after the Second World War with the formula of the welfare state, which was embraced by center-left and center-right elites and the population. So a very broad policy consensus in favor of the welfare state in the mid-20th century. Now, at the very end of the 20th century, in the 80s, a cross-ideological consensus underpinned the ascent of neoliberalism. Currently, this policy formula is in crisis without actually being replaced by a new policy setup yet. So much is at stake as the opportunity has emerged for our societies to venture into a new direction. Now, what would that direction be? Since the mid-19th century, when the utopian socialists started questioning capitalism, challenging capitalism, progressive social reform has been debated within a range that spans on the right from the prosperity that capitalism generates, to the left, to the solidarity socialism nurtures. So prevailing policy solutions have been a matter, in fact, of a smart mix between the two social systems. There is much nostalgia now for a return to the old formula of the inclusive prosperity of the welfare state of the mid-20th century. This would be a terrible idea, as the way this prosperity was obtained with increased consumption and growth devastated the environment. In this book, I claim that we stand at a very special moment in history when, if we want to advance, we need to abandon altogether these blueprints, socialism, capitalism, and whatever mix of the two. and think afresh about the available avenues for radical progressive politics. One of the reasons, probably the most simple reason for abandoning these blueprints, is that no attractive utopias are currently available to suggest an attractive and a plausible alternative. True, discontent with capitalism has been growing now with the pandemic, and before that with austerity policies that followed the financial meltdown of 2008. And the socialist idea has gained some of its lost popularity, especially among the young. But the idea has been badly discredited by the failed experiments in Eastern Europe and elsewhere, so it cannot do its job of massive mobilization of creative political energies. Moreover, socialism is not an opportune alternative to capitalism because, as Václav Havel so ardently used to insist, the two systems have much in common, especially in terms of the productivist pressures that are so nefarious for both human beings and the natural environment, the phenomenon of what Havel called samopohyb. And these were tendencies endemic to both capitalism and socialism, the destruction of human nature and our natural environment. As to a terminal crisis of capitalism on which the radical left often counts, this is not there either. Even a global pandemic did not result in a systemic crisis of capitalism, so let us not hold our breath for such a thing. There is certainly no revolution in the offing. So currently we are missing the three typical levers of radical social change: a systemic crisis, the likelihood of revolution, and the availability of utopia. This is why we need to think without a blueprint. But that would require scrutinizing the current condition of capitalism and discerning available patterns for radical politics. And this is exactly what I believe I've done in the book. Not only I have tried, I believe I have articulated, by tying all the loose ends, articulated at least a plausible way of thinking about, of analysis of the current moment in which capitalism lives and possible solutions. I have designed a certain toolbox of critique, a theory, if you will, and offered a condensed review of the modern history of capitalism in order to articulate what is so peculiar about its current shape. And here is what I have found. While we have been discussing the crisis of capitalism in the aftermath of the 2008 financial meltdown, neoliberal capitalism, in fact, mutated into a new form, which I have called precarity capitalism. This new form is marked by the massification of political, economic, and psychological insecurity, a combination of factors from automation, globalization, cuts in social provision, a series of factors I review, has generated massive economic instability for ordinary citizens, for men and women, young and old, skilled and unskilled workers, for the middle classes and the poor alike. So precarity rather than inequality, I insist, is the great scourge of our times. Precarity is at the root of such social pathologies as the rise of populism and the inability of liberal democracies to effectively manage crises. Precarity is affecting how we cope with the pandemic, how we deal with poverty, how much we support the green transition, or how we treat immigrants. So let's have a closer look at this new phenomenon, generalized massive precarity. It originated with the increased exposure of European societies to the competitive pressures of the globally integrated markets at the end of the 20th century. So it is an offshoot of neoliberalism in that sense. Especially the exposure to competition from countries with cheap labor, such as China. For the sake of ensuring the competitiveness of national economies in the global market, center-right and center-left political elites undertook two sets of reforms. On the one hand, the liberalization of labor markets reduced employment security, which allowed companies the flexibility they needed to compete globally. On the other hand, in their competition to retain corporations within their national jurisdiction, states reduced corporate taxation, which in turn led to reduced spending on public services such as healthcare and others. The austerity policies with which governments tackled the financial meltdown of 2008 reinforced these policies and deepened their social effect. And here I want to stress something that often gets misunderstood. While neoliberalism focused its energies, its kind of political energies, on ensuring competition, the switch in the new form of capitalism is on competitiveness, which sometimes we reduce competition exactly to help certain players like big corporations, national champions, to be more competitive in the global economy. So this setup fueled two trajectories of generalized precarity. On the one hand, there is the dimension of personal fragility. The exposure to global competition increased the work pressures for all, except for a handful of national champions, including on high-skilled workers in state companies. Remember such phenomenon as the France telecom suicides. So job insecurity is the reason why the well-employed do not dare to leave or slow down the rat race, even if they value leisure and family life. The crucial divide within societies dominated by precarity is between a minority sheltered in a diminished set and ever diminishing set of career paths or sufficient of secure career paths, that is, or sufficient wealth not to bother about that, and a majority living in persistent anxiety over the cost of health, housing, education, the quality of public services, and other formerly ordinary attributes of middle-class life. While the precarity of the poor is expressed in indebtedness and further impoverishment, the precarity of the rich is expressed in an epidemic of mental health disorders such as burnout, as well as higher divorce rate. On the other hand, there is the societal or collective dimension of fragility. Our societies became more fragile because the public sector shrank and the public authority passed its responsibility for the common good onto individuals and markets. The pandemic has hopefully laid bare this collective dimension of fragility. The depletion of the public sector, but also the habit of political elites to engage in what I call socially irresponsible rule, that is, rule which achieves certain policy objectives, let's say slowing down the pandemic, but without regard for the longer term consequences of public policy, is at the root of the paradox that Western societies, despite their scientific might, material affluence, and political sophistication, despite all that, have proven so unable to cope effectively with the spread of a virus which is neither very deadly nor completely unknown. The COVID pandemic was in fact enabled by an underlying epidemic of precarity, which began spreading in the early 21st century. Now, a perfect illustration of this problem is the failed attempt by the European Commission to pursue the idea it had in 2017 to develop a vaccine for pathogens like coronavirus within certain program that is called the Innovative Medicines Initiative, a private-public partnership between the European Union and the European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industries and Associations, so Big Pharma, if you wish, whose function is to fund health research and innovation, so exactly the place to develop vaccines ahead of the pandemic. The drug companies rejected the idea as being unprofitable, and the project was dropped. Now, while one can expect an economic actor like a pharmaceutical company to be driven by considerations of profit, the European Commission, as the executive arm of the European Union, is a public authority with the duty to safeguard public welfare. It adopted market logic to the detriment of the public good. So this is just to illustrate what I call the collective precarity dimension. So massive precarity is at the root of another paradox. The economic and social crisis of the Great Recession did not cause a radicalization of political sentiment in a leftward direction. Against the hope and expectation of the left, the celebrated crisis of capitalism, and there was much talk of that after 2008, in fact triggered an electoral shift to the right, to the center right, but also to the far right. How come? Well, very simple explanation, in fact. This is because when people's lives are unstable, they long for stability, for security, especially when a positive utopia is missing. Precarity nurtures conservative and even reactionary instincts. Precarity is my explanation also with our fixation on inequality, and wrongly so. It is exactly because we can no longer rely on a robust public sector and a social safety net that personal wealth becomes so important. Thus, our obsession with inequality. In this sense, the concern with inequality is a symptom of precarity. Private wealth matters extremely when public support is deficient. But no matter how equal our societies become, without a robust public sector, we will remain precarious. No one would ever be rich enough, except maybe the top 0.1%, to provide for themselves a good quality healthcare, because that takes an immense investment in medical research and long-term capacity building. In fact, I claim that with its extreme focus on inequality, the left has become part of the problem, as it has diverted attention from the real issue, namely precarity. Do I have a bit of time to explain that last point? How are we doing with time? Let me clarify this charge, that important charge I have. It's by taking as an example a proposal which has gained much popularity and is representative of the predominant thinking on the left, the project of participatory socialism that the eminent French economist Thomas Piketty has advanced. This project has two pillars of progressive social reform. The first pillar is a dramatic redistribution from rich to poor, sourced from income and wealth taxation. A wealth tax is to provide the funds for a capital endowment, inheritance for all, something like 120,000 euro, each is to receive at age 25. The second pillar is increased worker involvement in the management of companies, for instance, by giving employees half of the seats on the board of large companies. Participatory socialism. Sounds very radical, right? Well, proposals such as this, which advocate a dramatic redistribution of wealth and power from rich to poor, from capital to labor, are now being advocated as a form of radical opposition to neoliberal capitalism. However, the departure from neoliberal convention is only apparent. Thinking in terms of inequality engages a logic of comparison between individuals and presents the idea of social justice in individualistic terms as a matter of personal circumstance, of private wealth. Such a focus on individual circumstances is a trademark, is one of the distinctive features of the neoliberal mentality. So this neoliberal mentality has permeated the thinking on the left, and it is exemplified, it is borne out in this fixation on inequality. This thinking eliminates the notion of collective well-being that has always been fundamental for socialism, as it espoused a solidaristic economy without emphasizing neither equality nor prosperity. This is in the original thinking of the socialist authors. Equality within prosperity is not a socialist idea. Solidarity in well-being is. It might be actually worth remembering that Karl Marx did not advocate economic equality. He was in fact critical and very dismissive of proposals for wage equality in his time. Okay, we might also do well to recall that totalitarian regimes in Eastern Europe created societies that were egalitarian, but certainly not solidaristic, as the combination between discretionary political power and poorly governed economy created an atmosphere of mutual mistrust and competition for scarce resources. Similarly, the increase of worker representation on company boards would not solve much. In conditions of globally integrated markets, even state-owned companies or companies owned by the workers would behave like profit-seeking entities, ergo capitalist, think China. Involving workers in the company's management would only increase workers' vested interest in the capacity of their company to pursue profit, with all the familiar negative impact on human beings and nature, from self-exploitation, poor work-life balance, mental health disorders, and extractive economic practices that destroy the ecosystem. So what do we do with this discovery? Namely that precarity and not inequality is the root cause of many of our society's problems. So what? Well, this raises the stakes for progressive politics. Fighting precarity and not just inequality becomes a priority. A new path of reform opens. Replacing the growth and redistribution formula with fighting precarity renders social justice compatible with environmental justice. The very nature of contemporary socialism presents an opportunity for a radical social transformation. And this is exactly where I seek the alternative. Because of changes in forms of property ownership and job tenure, hardly anyone, I establish, is sheltered from the pressures of globally integrated capitalism. So precarity, the new malaise, is not a matter of income distribution or forms of property ownership. Remember, the rich, the owners and managers of capital are also experiencing precarity. As job pressures are increasing, investments are unsafe, and the increase of mental health disorder crises. But importantly, at the root of these experiences of precarity is the exposure of societies to the competitive pressures of global capitalism. The pursuit of profit is negatively affecting the life even of the purported winners of globalization. The fact that the winners have come to hate the game because the game at which they're winning, because the price paid in personal experiences is too high, creates an opportunity to forge a very broad coalition of forces to support reforms that strike at the core dynamic of capitalism, the competitive pursuit of profit. If policy is persistently pursued in this direction, even the very mundane policy that strikes at the profit motive, this would amount gradually to exiting capitalism by subverting it from within in a strategy of radical but pragmatic changes. In the book, I review a series of policy reform, but I will not go into that here because, of course, you'll need to buy the book. And this is from me today. In English or German?
So, Ludger.
Wolfgang, would you go ahead? Yeah,
yes.
With your commentary, please.
Albena, I've certainly learned a lot. I read your paper on anti-capital for the 21st century, and I learned a lot from your talk now, which is going far beyond this short article, going into your wonderfully composed book. I have also high normative sympathies for the direction you are arguing in. Unfortunately, I have a different view on capitalist reality. And as Germans are, they are somehow rude in discussions. I will not applaud all the time to your magnificent writing. I will focus simply on the points where we disagree. And I will briefly say something on capitalism. I will say something on your key variable to some extent, precarious capitalism and precariate. What distinguish precariate from proletariat? And then I will, what you are doing in your paper, but you doesn't mention it, I will challenge your point of view that capitalism will be the main cleavage in our societies. There may be different cleavages which are more powerfully inform our discourses in society. And then you have coined this wonderful term of a meta crisis. I will say a few words on this as well. And then at the end, certainly the subversion from within. Fukuyama has written, as we all know, this very often cited, criticized essay in 1989. And he said, there is finally the victory of liberalism. And liberalism has two dimensions. The one is liberal democracy, and the other one is liberal capitalism. And here is probably the first point of disagreement. I would argue he was perfectly right, saying there will be a widespread, a global spread of capitalism. So it might not be the crisis of capitalism, but the triumph of capitalism we are witnessing during the last 2 or 3 decades. He was completely wrong on the liberal democracy. What we are seeing now for 25 years, there's a kind of illiberalization of electoral democracies and also of liberal democracies as well. Capitalism. Probably I have a deformation professionnelle because I'm a comparativist. And as a comparativist, we are used to talk not about capitalism anymore, but about varieties of capitalism. We are talking about the varieties of democracy and varieties of capitalism as well. So there is a classical, and it seems to me this is a kind of focus of your arguments. There is the liberal or neoliberal Anglo-Saxon capitalism. But as Peter Hall and others have argued, there is a different form as well, and this is uncoordinated capitalism, basically in Western Europe and in its best form in Northern Europe. Now we have seen a kind of oligarch and gangster capitalism in Russia and Ukraine, and then we have this strange mix of an deregulated Manchester capitalism with a strong steering on the economic foreign relations in China. So this is probably the strangest form, but a powerful form. So if we are talking about the opportunity structure of a kind of change from within, there might be quite different forces working within the welfare capitalism of Western and Northern Europe and the liberal capitalism of the United States and the Chinese capitalism as well. So my point and question is, should we not talk about varieties of capitalism? And if we don't do it on a more highly abstract way, as you are arguing, can we neglect these different dynamics? Then the precariat. This is a term which I like to be associated to capitalism, and this is what we have called since the early 1980s the neoliberal form of globalization. And you describe it very well. If we are no longer talking, rightfully no longer talking about the proletariat, because the classical working class, let's say in Germany, the automobile workers, they are not precarious. They earn as much as an associate professor in German universities to some extent. If you are working for Mercedes, Porsche, and Volkswagen, you are the antithesis to the precariat. So if we are talking about the precariat, then we are talking about an apolitical entity. So these are the most politically most apathetic strata we have. So we cannot, this is not what you are saying, but we cannot expect from them to being a subversive motor. But if we don't have the proletariat, if we don't have the precariat, who is a famous historical subject who can be the grave digger of capitalism? I liked very much this space of indeterminacy, as a very difficult word for me, of Laclau and Chantal Mouffe. The point is, would you say that West European capitalism is in such a space of indeterminacy? And is it not? And here I have probably as well a different point on COVID-19. Not what you said about that capitalism thought this is not profitable to develop a vaccine. Now is the big business for Pfizer, BioNTech, AstraZeneca, and so forth. And the state is to some extent back. If you see how the European Union now is as a kind of super Keynesian mood, one could argue, doing more deficit spending than ever in history. And even this fiscal conservative Germany is spending, spending, spending. So to some extent, the state is back in and helps capitalism not only to survive, but to maybe also to transform. And here, new actors, I'm wondering why you did not mention them really, at least not in your talk, the giant tech firms. What about them? Are they not actors, powerful actors, and are they not transforming and adapting capitalism into a new age? So we may enter a kind of new Kondratiev wave with a digital driver. And what is about this? And would it be not only then a form of capitalism which produces precarity, but produces high skilled, well-paid jobs? Of course, on the other side, we know it will produce losers as well. But the winners may be much more powerful than in political terms than the precariat. A last point, I should not talk too long. A last point is this socio-economic cleavage still the most prominent one which polarizes our society? Is there not a cross-cutting cultural cleavage about identity, about ecological question, about ethnicity, migration, and so forth? And this diverged to some extent the progressive discourse. I think you quoted Nancy Fraser with her progressive neoliberalism. So it's not that much about the transformation of capitalism. It's very much about those academic strata which are now not associating progressively with the proletariat, the working class, or precariat, but they are progressive because they are ecologically progressive in gender terms and so forth, but it's no longer a challenge. They are not challenging the capitalism, at least I don't see it. Last question. It is a good idea not again to embark on these old notions like socialism and so forth. Even they have a novel form with this participatory socialism. But if you are saying capitalism is venturing into new uncharted territory, so to say, why should we not have at the moment an idea of capitalism, not normatively, but empirically, that it finds a new kind of dynamic and equilibrium? And this is a digital transformation which does not lead, according to my perspective, to a new insecurity, and it may form a pro-capitalist alliance which stabilizes capitalism. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Wolfgang. Big thanks to both of you. Thank you, Albena, for very nicely summing up the main lines of your argumentation and emphasizing also in your talk that it is about precarity and this kind of precarity capitalism with all the insecurities and instabilities involved. That is the issue for you rather than the question of inequality. And Wolfgang, very good that you were a bit German on this and directly came to the points that you disagree about. It was many already, so it was a whole catalog of questions. Albena, you should have the chance first to respond. Not sure if it will be possible to respond to all of them, but make a selection of the ones that you prefer. And then we already have some questions lining up in the chat. Please, Albena.
Yes, actually, I can. I'll be happy to respond quickly to all of them because I have something to say. Well, the triumph of capitalism, the ongoing triumph of capitalism, it is economic, this triumph. But if we consider capitalism also as a social system, the troubles are on that level. And the troubles of precarity I'm describing are on that level. Otherwise, capitalism as an engine of creating economic prosperity, as I say in the book, it is not in crisis. But the problems are when you look at it as a society, as a type of society. Indeed, varieties of capitalism, and I have acknowledged that in the book very briefly, because what I observe is that as the various national formats of capitalism interact within the globally integrated political economy, they're exposed to competitive pressures. I mean, look the way European countries are competing for access to China, or the way Europe and the US are competing for access to China. So as they're exposed to these competitive pressures, their political economies are reacting in a rather, in a similar tendency, but of course, the reactions are different according to the varieties of capitalism. And if further work needs to be done, is exactly to describe how the varieties of capitalism react to these pressures that I describe in the book. So indeed, that will be a very interesting type of studies in terms of opportunity structures. A wonderful question about the historical subject. Now, I do not adopt Guy Standing's term, the precariat. Indeed, as one of my critics beautifully said, you cannot count on these people to be a historical subject. They have no time. Try inviting them to dinner, let alone to a revolution. For me, the precarity is a social condition. It does not mark just one group of people in contradistinction to another. That's why I do not speak about precariat. I speak about the social condition of precarity and study its implications for society. We are in a moment of indeterminacy. That indeterminacy, however, I describe it as a crisis of crisis, meta-crisis. So we all know that something is wrong, and still we live with this experience of crisis, and there's no end to it. So the very crisis is a crisis. Within this indeterminacy, it seems to be breaking up, and it seems that the state is back. But how is the state back? It is back by throwing money at businesses. It is back by enforcing lockdowns. Is it back through building up hospitals and hospital beds and investing in public health care? I don't see this happening. So it is indeed such a moment when we can go in many directions. And what I'm claiming is only that fighting precarity not by one social group, through a large consensus that is taken up by policy elites, is just one possible alternative. I'm not saying that this is bound to happen, but there is a possible trajectory for that which is being opened right now. This is a very, very interesting another trajectory of the new actors, the giant tech firms altering the nature of capitalism. Yes. One remark on the relevant socioeconomic cleavages. This is absolutely important. But what I find has been the big socioeconomic cleavage is the shift, the division between those who experience the exposure to globalization as an opportunity, workers in tech firms, let's say, and those who experience it as a risk. So the new poll, winners versus losers, risk, opportunity. that cuts across capital labor. For instance, there are very strong alliances of capital and labor within industries, according to the, whether they win or lose from exposure to global markets, including to the IT technology. So these are very strong cleavages that, but if you look at the two, seemingly, if the class struggle is between the winners and losers of globalization, I'm saying that still they share an interest to fight precarity. So we might, rather than focusing on the class struggle between those two groups, we might be able, through the initiative of policy elites, to organize an overarching consensus against capitalism based on the common denominator of aversion to precarity. Okay, this is my brief answers. Of course, I need to think more.
Thanks, Albena. I see, Wolfgang, that you feel tempted to get in again, but maybe we can save this for a bit later, and we will start with the questions now. We have two questions by Kajan Klee in the F&A section, in case you want to open it and to read it as well, Albena, but I will read it out to you as well. The first one is, in what way is the destruction of the environment endemic to socialism? So this is the raising the environmental issue. And in order to answer that question, Kajan Klee says, one maybe has to say what understanding of socialism you have. And adding, I would understand socialism as the common ownership of the means of production of all members of a society. And while there is an inherent extractive motive to capitalism, this motive is not so clear to socialism. So to what degree is destruction of environment endemic to socialism? First question. And the second question on a different topic regards your notion of very radical left. And Kajan Klee, the proposals that you called very radical left-wing aren't radical left-wing suggestions. Radical left-wing demands a complete equality of all workers in, for example, a factory in decision-making processes, not merely strengthened labor participation, not a wealth tax, but expropriation of capitalists. I agree that we currently lack a feasible socialist utopia, but aren't you either misrepresenting or dodging what actual radical left-wing positions are? I think it was understandable as well. So both questions by Kajan Klee.
Okay, the destruction of the environment. So first, my definition of socialism, yes, common ownership of the means of production, either held in public hands or collectively by the state or collectively by the workers. But think of it, the way we own the means of production does not dictate how we use these means of production. Democratically, we can decide to go and destroy nature for the sake of enrichment of everybody. There is no, nothing prevents a fully democratic entity and with socialized means of production to embark on either very competitive behavior in the global economy, committed to the pursuit of profit, globally, or to the extraction of the environment. This was the experience in really existing socialism. So I'm not saying, probably I'm ready to correct myself. It might not be endemic to socialism, but socialism is not a safeguard against this kind of motivation. Now, the radical left, again, the description of the radical left projects are indeed, worker participation in the running of the factories and expropriation of ownership. Again, if these two things do not eliminate the profit motive, the commitment to competitive pursuit of profit in the global economy, that is not going to solve anything. I believe that I'm not mispresenting, because this is indeed what those proposals are. I stand to be corrected, but I still need to see what are existing radical proposals that do not go beyond a worker participation and expropriation of property.
Thanks, Albena. So we have questions on all channels by Yevgeny Dainov, who's sending his regards to all of us and especially to you. Yevgeny, maybe Nikki can just open and let you in, and you can ask the questions yourself. Here we go. Yevgeny, please.
Hello, everybody. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Good. I'm very pleased to see Albena. She was a star student of mine several lifetimes ago. We've been having with Albena a running discussion. What I see is happening in capitalism and in Eastern Europe, in the gangster authoritarian regimes, is the same thing, an attempt to turn the clock back to feudalism, which means to a system of relations of dependence and submission, in this way turning our backs to 300 years of liberal history in which the main idea was to achieve conditions for an independent life of individuals, communities, and states. So I was wondering whether Albena is prepared to link up her critique of capitalism, which I find very persuasive, with what we are living here, because I'm stuck here in Bulgaria. What we're living here is a blatant revival of feudal relations, everybody knowing their place and saluting the big boss. Thank you.
Yes, Kenny, I'm absolutely thrilled to be talking to you again, my former teacher and now a friend. To what extent these are common dynamics? In truth, I have only studied the situation in the West because the situation in Eastern Europe is even more complicated. And you're much better placed than me to tell us about it. However, this resembles this new feudalism that is being engendered in both Eastern Europe and Western Europe, has probably a lot in common, as we see, especially political elites engaging in this kind of a rule, which we see more and more, this kind of autocratic rule of law violations, also in mature democracies of Western Europe. So indeed, I would agree with your diagnosis of neo-feudalism, but I would say that exactly because the disease is so broadly spread, the only hope would be not to trust, not to put our hope in any kind of a class struggle type of divide. This is too weak already, but to seek a very broad alliance of forces that can push back.
So next we have Clemena, I guess, who wants to ask something about precarity, the concept of precarity. Clemena.
Okay, just a second. Hi, Albena. Hello, hello. Hi, do you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Clemena. Hi, I hear you very well.
Sorry, because I can't see you right now. You know, I have the suspicion that you are saying something quite deep and abstract, so I feel a bit ashamed that I'm going to ask a very simple question. And the simple question is, I was listening to your talk, which I liked very much. I never thought about precarity in this sort of context. And I kept asking myself, if we accept your analysis, ideally speaking, what would be the desired state that we would want to bring about? So there's no precarity. So that would be a situation in which people have the sense that their basic needs are guaranteed. But I think that most this is where it would be very difficult to actually decide what a different people have completely a different sense of their basic needs. You know, I spent a lot of today with a friend of mine complaining that she couldn't pay for her daughter's ballet lessons. Now, is that a basic need for her? It is a basic need. For most people, it isn't. So, you know, this is just a very practical question. What would be a state towards which we, you know, strive for? And the second thing, I was thinking that, you know, you present precarity as somehow precarity versus inequality. And I would think that nowadays, it seems to me that it's actually the combination of the two that is bringing this toxic combination rather than one versus the other. I mean, precarity is everything you describe as a social condition, and inequality is very much the condition for undermining democracy. You basically have people who are unelected, you know, making decisions over elected governments and so on. So anyhow, I think it is the combination of the two that is probably what is most dangerous and what leads to, you know, a lot of what you just described, you know, right-wing parties coming around and all the rest of it. So my question is basically the definition of precariousness and what's the opposite of that.
Right, oh, very smart questions. Let me try to answer. So, so precarity is a social, political, economic instability. Fighting precarity would mean providing economic stability, not in the sense of satisfying basic needs, but in the sense of satisfying essential needs. Now, the difference is the following. Someone's basic need might be the ballet lessons of their daughter or having a second home. But the essential needs of society are, you know, healthcare, culture, education, these things. So I was struck reading the opening lines of the Port Huron statement. This is the statement written in '68 by the revolutionary students in the US, stating, you know, their rebellion against the consumer society. You know, those were the years when people were thinking big, thinking against and beyond, you know, the capitalist versus socialist dilemma. And the opening line is, "We were bred in relative affluence." So that made me actually think that basic economic stability is a prerequisite, is an enabling condition for society to venture into experimentation. The opposite, precarity, economic instability, is making people conservative, actually. So I'm not saying that by providing some stability, we will change society. No, we will create the enabling conditions for people to want to live differently. And then for this agent of social change to be born. Your observation about precarity versus inequality, what I'm appealing is that we distinguish between three kinds of social evil: precarity, so the generalized insecurity, economic inequality, and impoverishment. There are three distinct problems that need to be analyzed separately, not to be confused. What is important with regard to inequality is that economic inequality does not translate into social inequality, into privilege. For instance, that, you know, the rich people can buy buy policy, but their triggers, their institutional triggers of that translation of economic affluence into social privilege. For instance, the campaign financing system in the US. So we need to fight these institutional translators of economic inequality into social privilege, because in itself inequality is not the problem. impoverishment is. Right, so my appeal is that we do not confuse them. I'm not saying that they're not important. They're three distinct issues: precarity, inequality, impoverishment. And you can have perfectly equal societies that are precarious. You can have very poor societies that are stable and not unequal, etc. You can have all kinds of configurations along those key lines.
So Yevgeny is sending a little note in the chat. Everybody wants to read it on the reconstruction of society on the basis of love. And it refers to the Port Huron Statement 1962 and the other document, what you also mentioned, Albena, Václav Havel's Power of the Powerless. This just as a note for everybody. And I just noticed that all my comments that I sent to people individually can be read by everybody. So this format obviously does not allow for private statements, but nothing bad has happened, so no problem. So next will be our dear colleague, Mieke Verloo. Mieke, please, welcome.
Yeah. Okay, my question is about the concept of solidarity. I think it's possible not to hear me because it's, is it?
We can hear you, Mieke, a bit louder.
Yeah, my question is about the concept of solidarity because it's a concept that you seem to use as within an economic system. So I would love to hear more about how you understand this concept of solidarity as an economic concept. Thank you.
Yeah. I don't have a ready answer to that. I will have to think, and I promise to think and come back to you. This is a great question to which I do not have an answer.
Albena.
Next question.
Mieke, I can see that you're that there's the little Mieke window again. Maybe you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I would love to have a conversation about this concept. And
that would be great. Let's do that.
Traditions of the IWM as well. Okay.
Good.
Thanks, Mieke. Albena, at the beginning, when introducing you, I so very much stressed the title and the subtitle of your book. And to say it again, how fighting precarity can achieve radical change without crisis or utopia.
Or revolution. The publisher eliminated revolution from the subtitle because it was very too long. But in fact, a revolution, crisis, or utopia. Yeah.
I mean, maybe it's not a very wise decision also for economic reasons, because revolution in the title, I think, is always good. So, but that's a different. But my question relates to the last word of what is in the title, and that is utopia. You also referred to it in your, you briefly referred to it in your presentation, but also in your article that I read. And my general question is, why is there this absence of utopia? And what is the explanation for it? And is it simply that it is not needed, or that all utopias are so exhausted that they simply do not function? And to just say this, I mean, that at one point you referred to Habermas, and the Habermasian notion is more that all particular utopias have come to an end, so they are somehow exhausted. They're still there, but they are not strong enough to do anything. And then there is also somebody I mentioned in the beginning. I just want to mention her name again, Agnes Heller, who has thought a lot about utopia and dystopia, and who towards the later part of her life, in fact, favored dystopia over utopia, because as she always claimed, utopia pacifies people, while dystopia makes people act and activates them and makes them do something. So what is really the background of your absence of utopia? Is it that the utopia is not needed, that you rather consider utopias harmful, or simply that we do not have them?
Thank you. Short answer, the last one. Basically, I start from surveying the absence of utopias and then saying, can we still advance without them?
Mhm.
I would go with Heller on utopias, but even if I'm convinced that some positive utopia is helpful in times of crisis, because the combination between economic instability and lack of utopia makes people conservative because they cling to what they already know. However, the question for me is, given the absence of these utopian energies, can we advance? And I say, well, yes, we can advance if we start fighting the root of precarization, which is the profit motive that has spread, that has now infected the whole of our societies. And that would, by definition, amount to an anti-capitalist transformation, even if we do not call it for the purposes of mobilization in these terms. Yeah.
Maybe Wolfgang, this is maybe the point to bring you in again if you want.
Yeah, briefly, and it's an extremely interesting discussion. And Albena, I like your response to see capitalism not primarily as an economic structure and mechanism, but as a social system. But still, we have to dig into the possible tension. If the economic system is to some extent dynamic and thriving, and at the same time, we have, as we know, victims in the social system. And what Mike said, and with solidarity, one could at least link it somehow to the social system and the absence of an subjective factor, as Marx would have put it, or an actor who transform capitalism from within. Solidarity is certainly less obvious in individualized, segmented societies of singularities. These are not the industrial societies where we all could think about a kind of collective actor. We don't have the consciousness, not the organization, and so forth. But this may make capitalism safe. So capitalism produces victims in the social system. They are no longer able to form collective action, and this might immunize to some extent capitalism. Only one point, since, and I understand the dramaturgic point of it, you are distinguishing distinguishing inequality and precarity. But is it not the highest form of inequality if you have people living in precarity? So it's no longer socioeconomic indicators only, the complete different set of life chances. The one are safe and the others are living in precarity. So there seems to be a link to inequality, at least.
Yeah, great. Yes, we could actually think about the stratification of precarity and study the links between inequality and precarity. I simply want us to move away from boiling down everything to economic inequality and just move to more interesting questions. Which brings me to the remark, Amika's remark about solidarity. Now, we could, within this general precarization, we could have competitions of precarities, like my precarity is more awful than yours. Or could we have a solidarity based on these shared experiences of precarity, even if they are differently lived, these precarities? So what possibly could happen is that democratic political elites tasked with, with the task of social change, could move in that direction. Well, we're seeing now a cross-ideological alliance in the European Union between the center-right and center-left to make some sort of a, we'll see how genuine this is, but pro-environmental and pro-social policy. We have the European Green Agenda, the European Pillar of Social Rights. So these things are, in fact, they contain policies that go against the profit motive, that go against precarity. And these are political elites that act under the pressure of their, electorate. So it is happening without a distinct political subject like an organized working class pushing in that direction. Actually, the trade unions are against, are making trouble with the green agenda. Some of the trade unions. And for understanding, I understand the reasons. So yes, I need to keep thinking about the solidarity within precarity, because you can have a competition of precarities, but you can have also solidarity within that. And this is the responsibility of political, leadership, in which direction to take the whole matter.
Albena, you also, like, one of the axes of your paper is also that you say it is not about a criticism of private property, but about the pursuit of profit. This is your main concern. And you say to achieve this radical change that is promised in the title, to achieve that, we would have to eliminate this pursuit of profit. That is the main goal. Is that something in keeping with the very basic, simple conditio humana? Is it imaginable that this would ever happen? And if we speak, for example, about things like ecological movements, Green Deal and so on, this is one of the things that we're discussing at the moment. Isn't it actually good to make it profitable? So to bring about change, we are discussing really opposite ideas, I think. So is this a realist approach? And my question also, and that I maybe did not find enough in your paper, but I obviously did not read everything of you. How do you think that this change can be brought about? How would it happen that the pursuit of profit is not practiced any longer?
So yes, great. Thank you for this. Indeed. What I see, a very simple rendition of capitalism I present there is along these three trajectories. So the main driving dynamic of capitalism is the pursuit of profit, not profit itself, not growth itself, because you can grow an economy without your starting point being the pursuit of profit. This is the nuance. Because of course, a reasonably run economy, no matter in what social system, would necessitate that you realize more, more gains than where you started. Mm. But the profit motive is something very different. The profit motive is you choose the economic activity according to the likelihood of realizing profit. That's a very different economic thinking and paradigm of organizing your economy. So this is the driving dynamic of capitalism. Well, the form of ownership is only an institution within capitalism. So you can enact the profit motive through a variety of institutions, not necessarily with the private property only. But then, couldn't we imagine that we drop the profit motive or in economic decisions and yet still retain private property, even use private property to go against the profit motive? I think that if we have any chance for a new social formation, it would be one that disconnects itself from the profit motive, but remains a variety of forms of ownership. So I'll put my money on fighting the profit motive, not fighting private property. And actually using the institutions to go against the driving dynamic.
Wolfgang, please.
Albena, could we think about not only as that capitalism creates problems, and may create some revolutionary subjects, but it creates opponents, and these opponents modernize capitalism, and by modernizing capitalism, they immunize capitalism against further attacks. If we are thinking of not about the working class and the welfare state throughout the 20th century, but if we think about the ecological movement, Fridays for Future, Extinction Rebellion, what we find there, what they probably produce, they make capitalism fit in fighting against global warming. So, and by that, they modernize capitalism, and they are, so to say, not the grave diggers, they are the modernizers. Is it completely wrong, or?
Well, actually, I find that pretty compelling. That is one of the possible trajectories of development of capitalism. What I'm tracing with this, anti-precarity trajectory is the possibility to go against exactly these dynamics through which capitalism keeps reinventing itself, actually capturing the energies of social protest very often. Yeah. So I would think that this reading of ever, self-reinvention of capitalism that you presented, I would take it as the backstage story and then think of whether we can still push ahead by, uniting, the political will of people who realize that they're paying too high a price for perpetuating capitalism in this way.
Albena, we have another question that that is in the F&A section. I will just read it out to you. It's it's an anonymous question. Just wondering if this is all very Western in its take. The population explosion and climate change is already making the precarious collapse in non-Western areas and causing ever-increasing pressure on Western stability. This is...
Yes, I would agree that this is where I have set the remit of my analysis. It is a very small book, as you can see. So my book subject matter is the way Western liberal democracies are reacting to these changes, to these dynamics, and the non-Western story needs to be told and needs to be taken into account. And what I'm only observing is that as liberal democracies or capitalist democracies are engaging in competition with totalitarian capitalists like China, they tend to absorb a lot of the competitive features of China. That's why we are becoming more and more like China in our shape. So I have only taken into account interactions in their effect on Western liberal democracies, because this is how I articulate my object of analysis. Yeah.
Thanks again. So it's close to 7:30. Maybe we can come to an end at this point. It was wonderful to listen to both of you. Albena, thanks a lot for your presentation, for the paper that we distributed before. It was a very nice occasion to do it at this point, also because the German translation just came out of your book. Wolfgang Merkel, thanks a lot for your comments. I think we could have continued for a while, but we already achieved something, and I think we came to some of the main concerns of your book. Other people are also sending their regards and their thanks to all of you. Let me just add before we finish that IWM will continue with its series of lectures on April 14 with a talk by our colleague Aisha Chala with Nicolas de Geneva, and it's a seminar on forced migration. You will find the link on our website. And having said that, I think this is the moment when, unfortunately, we have to depart. Have a good evening, and thanks again to both of you. Albena, I can see you wanna have a final word.
Yes. I just want to thank everybody. It's been very stimulating. I'm rethinking my work through your comments, everybody. Ludger, please copy and send the comments to me. Let's not lose them.
Okay.
They're precious, and I would like to respond to people personally. Yeah.
Thank you, Wolfgang.
And
Thank you.
hopefully we'll continue this over drinks and meals like good academic traditions are.
If the times were different, we definitely would, but yeah, it's a bit complicated at the moment. But anyway, we have done our best. Thank you. Thanks to both of you. Goodbye, Wolfgang.
Thank you. Bye-bye, Albena.
Bye.
Bye.